Hey everyone, welcome back to Field Stories. I'm Chris Catola with Michela this week, and Nick is still not with us. He's actually, I think he's back in his homeland today,
I think so.
but I think he's finally gotten his little global tour has ended, and I think he's back into England now. So he probably will be with us next week, but we will see. You never know with him.
Maybe
Um,
eventually.
yeah. I guess we'll get to it pretty quick. I guess
Mhm.
this week's episode is going to be a little different than our typical episodes. This week we're going to be focusing, I should say, on the fires that have been ravaging the Amazon and really pretty much all of South America. Um,
Mhm.
Currently, just to speak a little bit about where I am, I'm currently in Lima. Actually, I'm not in the jungle today. Um, and but I was in Madre Diaz in the lowland Amazon. As most of you know, I worked there, so I was there up until about the 10th of September. I was in the lowlands, and I saw the smoke just billowing and growing, and you just couldn't see the sun. Like, it
Wow.
was unbelievable. Um,
Mhm.
and then I had a chance to travel to northern Peru to do a small bird survey, and even there, the smoke was the same, unbelievable. Even in the Andes, even in the foothills, you normally can see the mountains in the distance for, to the horizon, really, and you couldn't see
Mhm.
them. You only could see the closest mountains, and even then, you barely see them. And then past that, just nothing but smoke, and it's like pure fog, but it was only smoke. So these fires are unbelievable, and to me, they are the worst since 2019. And 2019 was also very bad, but
I
this has
remember
been
that.
the worst that I've seen since then. And there's
Mhm.
a variety of reasons why that's occurring, but it's not just happening here in Peru; it's happening all throughout, as we said, South America. And I know,
Mhm.
Michaela, you and me, we discussed last week trying to do an episode, just the two of us talking. But I just feel like it would be not right to just have me talk about the Amazon. I mean, yes, I've lived there over 6 years, but still, I'm not Peruvian. I'm not from the area. I didn't grow up there. I
Yeah.
don't know all the intricacies like someone who's actually from the region does. So yeah, I mean, thankfully, I've developed a good network of friends, in the region, and I've asked a couple of my friends to come on today from the region and talk a bit about these fires. So yeah, today's episode is going to be more about these fires and deforestation, some of the issues that are occurring. So we're going to have, I guess you could say, the most important field story of all is, what's happening in the field and why are we losing it to these fires.
Yeah.
I guess without any more real lead in, I think that's where we'll go, and we'll just get right to the interview. So here we go. Hey everyone, welcome back to Field Stories. And so this week we're breaking with the typical format a little bit because of the fires that are happening across the Amazon and really all of South America. And we thought it was a really good, appropriate time to really discuss this really pressing and pertinent issue that's all over the media right now. Well, all over some parts of the media, maybe not in as much coverage as it should have. And I'm fortunate enough to have some, obviously some friends that work in the region. Clemencia, Pinasco, I've known her now for, I guess we've known each other like 4 years or so, Clemencia now, 3-4 years. And we've crossed paths in different locations, different NGOs we've worked for in the city and in Tambopata River. So we've gotten a chance to get to know each other. And she's got a lot of experience throughout, really not just Tambopata, but Madre Diaz and northern Peru and all throughout the region. And then Juan Diego Shoobridge. We've only known each other, about 2 weeks now, actually. But we got a chance to work together recently doing some macaw nest box project training and tree climbing. And it was great to meet you in person, JD, finally, and get to know you a bit. And I know you've worked, you're from Puerto Maldonado, and you've worked throughout the region as well, Madre Diaz. So I thought it would be good to, instead of just having, even though I live in Peru, instead of just having the perspective of a gringo who's been there 6 years, I think it'd be a lot better to talk to some people who are actually from the country and from the region and have not just lived there a few years, but their whole life. That's what we're going to do today, is talk a bit about the fires, not just in the Amazon, but throughout South America. and some of the other causes, and maybe some of the ways we can help. So yeah, I mean, maybe I'll let you go first, Clemencia, if you want to just give a little background about yourself and sort of what you're doing now and where you've been in the region.
Thanks, Chris. Well, thank you for sharing this space to chat a little bit about the fires, and which, it's something that happens every year, and it needs to have a little bit more visibility all around the world. I've been here in the Amazon for about 7-8 years now. Started working in 2017, moved permanently in 2019. I'm originally from Lima, trained as a biologist, although I don't do pure biology anymore. I now work at an organization that focuses on Amazonian regeneration. And right now I'm actually looking at the Madre de Dios River at my house. So yeah, I've been here the past few weeks, couple months when the fires have started, just seeing the whole change of the environment as the dry season arrived and as the fires started in the region. Thank you.
Cool. And then JD, if you want to go ahead and do a little introduction to yourself as well for our viewers.
Yeah, well, hi everyone. I'm Juan Diego. I'm a biologist. I study a master's in biodiversity. I'm native from Puerto Maldonado. Then I moved to Lima to study there. But I came back as soon as I finished university. Currently, now I'm living in Cusco, in Urubamba. That is the region that is next to Madre de Dios. I have a house in Madre de Dios, but now I'm living in Cusco. And yeah, here in the region we have that same problem with the fires, not only in the Amazon, also here in the Andes. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, so awesome. Thank you for that. So there's so much ground to cover and so many things we could talk about. But I guess the first thing, and I guess I'll toss it back to you, Clemencia, for this, although you can add if you want to it, JD, is maybe, Clemencia, you can discuss a little bit for our viewers and listeners. Something you mentioned, that this happens every year in the dry season. Maybe you could talk a bit about the cycle that occurs, and how, for the three of us who live and work in this region, this is, for me, it's a very bad year, but also smoke and fires is normal, sadly. So maybe you could talk a bit about the cycle that occurs in this area.
Thanks, Chris. Talking specifically about the Amazon, it's important to note that fires in the Amazon are not a naturally occurring phenomenon as they are in other drier climates. The Amazon holds a lot of humidity, and all the fires start as human-caused fires, mainly to clean farmlands. So during the wet season, new farmlands are going to be cut down, are going to be opened, as we say here. The trees are all going to be taken down, and all the shrubs and everything else is just going to be left there to dry. And then as the dry season comes and as the rains are stopping and all that wood and biomass are fully dry, it's going to be very easy to start burning. I think I'll just do this quick introduction. We're going to go deeper into the causes and motivations to burn farmland, cut farmland, but it's a cycle of slash and burn agriculture. There's a lot of dependency in creating small farms that are consistently kind of going from one spot to the other as the land isn't well taken care of and managed for farming. Farmlands are losing nutrients really quickly, so it's of interest to open a new farmland. There's other more complex reasons when you're talking about land titling and tenancy that I think will also be very interesting to discuss. And I think it would be very interesting to listen to Juan Diego about fires in the Andes, because they may be motivated by slightly different purposes as well.
Yeah, well, here in the Andes, we have fires too, but not naturally, the same as Clemencia already explained. So here, you don't need to clear the whole like land to create the harvest area. The main problem here is the people that have like alpacas, llamas, that is the cattle that they use here. Um, year after year, they normally burn all the mountains. So during the next rainy season, they create new grass for their animals. And normally, people think that they have those fires under control and starts like burning specific squares where they uh, take their animals to feed on the place. But what happens here is that the peak of the dry season that is here, the same as in the Amazon, like August, September, October, also we have a lot of wind. So
Mm.
if we have like a year that is a little bit drier than the year before, and with the wind, we get those fires out of control. So that's one
Yeah.
of the main reasons why we have fires in the mountains in both sides. The sides that goes to the Pacific Ocean. Here in Peru, we have the Andes chain that cut the country in two. The one side we have the Pacific influence, and the other one where we have the Amazon is the Atlantic influence. So the east part of the Andes chain is more humid, but what is happening due to the climate change each year is drier and drier. We have less rain, so that's becoming also a problem because the fires in the land, like the slash and burn in the Amazon, is every year. People create more harvest areas, they burn their lands, but what is happening now is that they're doing the same, but the problem is that dry is getting more drier, so the the fire gets out of control. And if we look, for example, the map of the country of Peru, in the region specifically of Madre de Dios, that all of the three of us knows pretty well,
Mhm.
we saw that the fires are concentrated more associated to the interoceanic road, this road that connects the Pacific to the Atlantic and across to Brazil. And
Yeah.
that means that you have more access to create like harvest lands.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. So kind of a question in terms of regarding like how the country and the natives kind of view what's happening outside of like the biological world. Are they like the general public kind of viewing this as, oh, it's definitely progressively gotten worse over the last few decades? And are there any sustainable practices that they're trying to implement to curb the intensity of these fires as they just get worse and worse every year?
I think there's definitely a tendency to acknowledge and see that fires are getting worse this year. We've had a more severe drought than other years, as Juan Diego was saying, which has definitely motivated fires to get out of control. And we're starting to see fires getting out of control and actually burning primary forests, which is something that, although it has happened in the past, this year there's been more burning of primary forests than in the past, which is also very telling about the humidity levels and the way that the Amazon is able to retain humidity. So the fires are now having like a landscape, an avalanche effect,
Yeah.
I guess, sorry, on several different factors and in the ways that water is generated and flows through the cycle in the Amazon. This year, we first saw a lot of, at least I saw a lot of mobilization within social media of many people, of specific circles, you could say, kind of announcing and denouncing the fires that were occurring. However, fire burning is still a very used practice in land management and farm management in the regions of Peru. There is not too much knowledge in many areas as to other ways to manage land and to prepare land for farming and to have a more sustainable farming practice that doesn't involve that cycle of burning to clean and prep your land for next year's farming. And let's see, what I don't know if you want to add something else, Juan Diego, or if I'm in the right path as to what the question was asking.
Yeah, and also something that happens specifically this year, 2024, is that on January they change one of the laws, the forestry law, Well, I'm not like in the political world, so I can't understand pretty well what's going on. But what I understand about this is that if someone wants to take advantage of the resource of the government in a land that is not private land of other one, and change the use of the land, for example, for do agriculture or maybe to have cattle ranching or whatever you want, you can take that land. So the best way to do that is by putting fire to everything, and then you can use in a different way that land that you are not the owner of that. So at least not too much in Madre de Dios, but in the North Andes, in the West slope, in the east slope, sorry, like Tarapoto, San Martin, Amazonas, and San Martin, that were the two regions of all Peru that had more problems like these years, is mainly due to that. It's like the expansion of the land in different ways to create space for other use of the land. And yeah, it's hard to navigate in this world of the fires because you have like different factors that are involved now. You have like political factors that they are changing laws that enhance people to create more fires. Then due to the climate change, the Peru, the Andes is like drier than previous years, so it's easier for the fires to get out of control of people. You said, Chris, that we met like 2 weeks ago climbing trees. Well, my also I'm a professional rock climber. I have a company. I practice rock climbing and mountaineering. And in the last 10 years, like in the tropical mountain ranges in Peru, we lost close to 50% of the snow that we have there. The glaciers are
Yeah.
disappearing extremely fast. And normally the water that keeps on the mountains, as in a form of snow or ice, and also the cloud forests that have a lot of mass that concentrates water that allowed to keep the Amazon like with their humidity like the rest of the year. So now that we are losing all of that, the main source of water is that the problems start getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. 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 There's just so much to unpack there. Thank you for adding that, JD and Clemencia. That was great. I think, wow, there's so many topics, but I think one thing I'd like to follow up on a little bit, which you brought out, Juan Diego, thank you for that, is the new laws here in Peru that came up. And again, I actually had a couple of people ask me about this because you asked a good question, Michela, as well about, what are people's opinions of it here. And, I'm not Peruvian, obviously, but I'm still living here. So I see the media, I talk to people, and my sense as a foreigner living here is it's not too unlike parts of the United States or Europe, which is it's pretty dependent on your background and where you live. And if you're more affluent, if you have more money, you can sit there and say, judge what's happening. And if you're poor and just surviving, you're trying to make a living. And then, of course, if you're a business just trying to get rich off the land, then you just want to get rich. Like everybody has their own interests, right? So I think it's pretty divided depending on who you talk to and where you go. There does seem, from my perspective, to have certainly been a lot of attention about the law that did come into effect this year, and even now if the fire is being potentially a result of it. But yeah, I wondered if maybe you guys, maybe Clemencia, if you have anything to add about the laws and about the land ownership, how that works. Because from my understanding, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically you have land, some areas of land that are not owned by, they're just kind of government land that just sits there and they're not really used. And strangely enough, you're not really able to take it for anything unless you basically do something with it. And that basically means, yeah, cutting it down or doing something with it. So it's actually strange as an NGO, you can't claim it as for conservation unless you do something to it. And then of course for farming, that means, yeah, slash it, burn it and do it. So maybe you could explain a bit more about that because I think it's a really interesting topic that our viewers would like to know about.
Yeah, I was actually reading up a little bit on the law just to freshen up my memory because it came out in January and a lot of things have happened since. So, as Chris was saying, we have several different levels of land ownership in the country. You can have a title, which is the utmost, almost intangible form of land ownership, but then you can also have a certificate of possession of the land, which just means that you've been in the land for a certain amount of time and it's in the process of being titled. And then you can also have land that doesn't really have any titles, which happens. There's less and less land now in the Amazon that is kind of open, but we also have the concession system, which is a whole other
topic
world of situations that is currently in the way that it's done. There's several pieces of concessions that can span thousands and thousands of hectares that don't really have anybody managing them. So those are very susceptible lands to invasions, to change the land use. And what's happened with the law, and I'm just looking at my notes here, we have different ministries in the country, and the one that is in charge of setting land use limitations would be a way of putting insignification, it has now been disallowed to work in that sense by the law. So essentially there's a law that now has taken the power away from the Ministry of the Environment to zone different parts of the Amazon and ensure that land use change doesn't happen in primary and productive forests. So now there's no extra barrier towards requesting a land use change, and the only institution that can allow it is the Ministry of Agriculture. And then there's maybe some deeper things that I can think of. Land titling is an important metric of development for a country. So, I've seen many times the government announce like, oh, we managed to title X amount of families' lands this year. And that is an important goal towards development of Peru, because people with titles is good. However, when you pair that incentive or that metric with the fact that you're not doing due diligence in terms of ensuring that land use change isn't going from primary forest to farmland, and there's no institution kind of looking at that step, it's making land more susceptible to change. And we have so many abandoned farmlands in the Amazon that we call purmas, that are just forests that have been abandoned. Many of them stay in with the cattle farming grass that will take years to change into Amazonian species. There's some that may be older and now recovering forests, but the incentive is still to have new forests be cut down and get titled. And as Chris was saying, and touching back to what you were saying, kind of giving a bit context here, the only way to get a title land is to show that you're working the land. And for the Ministry of Agriculture, that definition is very narrow, and you can only be working the land if you're farming on the land. So even if you want to propose an alternative that also makes money, such as a lodge or a research institution that is bringing in donations and bringing in funding, that isn't a valid form of working the land. So if you want to get titled, there's an incentive to deforest and to cut down your trees to create farmland. Was that a good summary?
Welcome to the topic, Michela. Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's perfect, Clemencia. Wow. This is exactly the kind of insight that I wanted to get across to viewers, because this is why it's so complicated. So thank you for that. That was great. Between Clemencia and Juan Diego, thank you for bringing some more light to that. And I think for me, quickly, so I know you have a question, Michela, but quickly for me, I find it kind of funny, but also a reminder of how complicated these laws are. That even you, Clemencia, is someone who actually works in this a lot and knows it. Like, you're Peruvian, so there's no language barrier with the laws and everything. You still have to check because it's so complicated. And that's the thing, is it's like, imagine bureaucracy we all face in all over the world, and then imagine it's even more bottled up in Peruvian and level bureaucracy. It's just so hard to understand what's even happening sometimes. But I think you did a really good job explaining that. Thank you for that.
JD, do you have anything else to add before I ask another question?
Well, about that topic, about the land use, Well, Clemencia explained it pretty well, and for example, I can give my personal experience. Like in Peru, everyone wants to have the title of the land, but you are owner of the land, but not the resources of the place. If you are closer to the city, yeah, everything is clear. But if you have, for example, a land in the Tambopata River riverbank near the river, for example,
Mhm.
probably it's a forest, a primary forest, a secondary forest, and not all the lands are with the title. So you sometimes buy the land, but you only buy the certification of possession. So then you go to the ministry agriculture and you ask for the title, and they look in the map that they have. Ah, but I can see this is not clear. You have forest here, which is the things that you are like promoting there. And yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah.
And yeah, that happens like in terms of the private lands, but well, what is going on now also in Brazil and Bolivia? I've been in Brazil in Acre region and also in Mato Grosso. I had the
Yeah.
opportunity in 2022 to travel there to photograph jaguars. I love photography. I've been there for 2 weeks there. And the Pantanal is outside of the Amazon basin, but is close to it. That connects with Bolivia, and all the water that flows from the Pantanal goes to Argentina to La Plata basin. So the Pantanal is like a savanna, but more tropical savanna that during the um, um, rainy season is covered with water, but during the dry season becomes like pastures, and you can see like the animals like on top of the farmlands, you know, and there they are producing a lot of soybeans, so they clear a lot of remains of the forest that they have there. But those soybeans don't goes only for the people that eat directly the beans. They produce oil, and more than 60% of the production of those lands in general in South America, we have the same in Bolivia, Paraguay, also Brazil, goes directly to to feed the animals, especially cows, for support meat to all over the world. And in the cattle areas is the main became the main problems of fires in these areas a little bit outside Peru. They need to burn in order to, after the next rainy season, create more pastures for the animals too.
Wow.
And I was just reading that in Pantanal, the fires can live underground as well, which further complicates the efforts to control, and it makes it much easier for them to spread throughout the region, which is
Yeah.
similar in other
Yeah.
peatlands in Indonesia and other countries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Obviously this is a really multifaceted, issue, and coming from a country that's a lot more developed, it's understandable why that there is a push for development, but at the same time it's quite heartbreaking to hear all of this, and it's a bit dismal. In terms of just efforts from the biological organizations or any other NGOs, is there any efforts to purchase? Can you purchase a land that's already been cleared and is no longer in use, or does that still have to now, to this new law, be used just primarily for agriculture? And then I guess, in terms of a person from the outside, I mean, I'm not from Peru, but what can we do? Could we have an impact? Do petitions work? I know that's a lot of questions, but yeah, it's quite a bit.
If you buy a land that already has a title, you're buying the title. So, if you had to cut forests to create your title and then you let it regrow and intentionally reforest it and then you sell that, you can buy that. If you're buying a land that doesn't have a title and is now forest recovery, or a purma, as we call it here, which is before a secondary forest, really, if we're not getting too technical, I think you would probably need to show that you have some kind of farming. And in terms of what can be done from the outside, visibility is a very important aspect. Cattle farming is a pretty important driver to Amazonian deforestation, especially in Brazil. So take that as you will. And agriculture in the Amazon, especially in Peru, is pretty small scale agriculture used locally. We do now have a bit more cacao production and soy production and palm oil production in the northern regions of the country that is for exportation, and just be conscious about what you're purchasing and who you're purchasing it from, as you should in general, to make sure that your products are coming from more sustainable sources. Locally, there's a lot of movement to try to encourage more sustainable practices in farming. Unfortunately, and I think this ties back to the earlier points that we were making of where you are and who you are changes your perspective on fires. There's a lot of it has to do with lack of information, lack of access to proper education. When you're talking to many small scale farmers in throughout the Amazon, be it native communities or just migrant farming communities, many of them just don't have access to education and knowledge as to better farming practices. There's just this idea that you need a burn because that's going to fertilize your soil and that's going to allow the trees or your farming products to grow. There's a lot of dependency on monoculture farming here of yucca, of papaya, pineapple. Depending on where you are in the Amazon, it can slightly change. And there's very little movement from the government to promote better practices, and there's very little capacity building being created to encourage better farming practices that will retain the nutrients of the soil when you're farming in the Amazon. Because as we may know, but it's good to say, the Amazon is actually very poor in nutrients. The rich layer is just the topmost layer of soil, and then beneath it's just clay. So when you're farming and you're not encouraging practices that retain that nutrient-rich layer, it's just going to be depleted very quickly. Especially some products like papaya are going to very quickly deplete it, are going to depend a lot on chemicals to make sure they're fertilized, pesticides, etc. There's alternatives. Some of them may be harder and maybe more expensive or less productive. So there needs to be some kind of work, of cohesive work from the government to incentivize farming practices that don't encourage more deforestation, if that makes any sense.
I guess I'll throw it to you in a minute, JD. I'm sure you have lots to add to that. I would jump in a little bit to answer your question a little bit, Michela. Not to self-promote, because I could probably talk about a lot of NGOs that do this across South America. So I don't want this only to be promoting an organization that I work for, but organizations similar to one of the ones I work for, which is Wilderness International, are ways that, directly, especially primary habitat, in the case of our organization, can be primary or moderately lightly disturbed habitat can be protected directly by purchasing those titled lands, as you said, Clemencia. And also, yeah, you're right. It's a big topic to talk about concessions, but taking on the lease, the 40-year lease and protection of a huge area that can be a conservation concession, as you mentioned, Clemencia, the level of protection in those concessions is not consistent. Let's just put it that way. So taking on the protection and properly protecting the area, those are ways that NGOs like Wilderness International, but also, let's be honest, Jungle Keepers in Peru, they do a good job of that as well. And, there's other NGOs, ACA has done a good job just in Peru and across South America, where they directly purchase and protect areas. So that's certainly one way. But yeah, to your point, Clemencia, as well, that's not going to fix everything, though, because you can't buy every single bit of land. And in the end, people also need to eat. They need to survive. So, I think we need to look toward ways to find more sustainable solutions. We have to do that all over the world. It's not just Peru. It's not just the Amazon. It's also North America and Europe. We all need to be more sustainable. And yeah, I guess to toss it back to you, JD, maybe you could, maybe you can talk a bit about, to build on what Clemencia was saying about, why people are farming and the traditional practices of use up land when it's done, move to another piece, why that's done, and then maybe some potential ways from your perspective that, we could move toward a more sustainable system where we don't have to continually destroy and damage new areas, where we could maybe find more sustainable ways. Like what do you think about that? What's your thoughts, and how could we move toward that in general?
Yeah, it's so complex and it's so big. Yeah, like I can answer your questions in different ways, but something that I feel that is important is the final client of the resources that produce South America. The client need to know where those products come and which is the impact in the world.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm not only talking about meat or agriculture. We're talking about the wood, like the forestry concessions, also
Yes.
the gold. That gold mining is one of the main source of deforestations and contamination like points in the Amazon basin. There are a lot of people in Europe or United States, North America, everywhere around the world that they are buying like this like sustainable gold. But where do you think that sustainable gold came from? It's
Yeah.
like in
Exactly.
some way came from the Amazon or different areas around the world.
Yeah.
And I know many people, even here in Peru, that they make a barbecue at their houses, and to have a status, they buy in the market like the meat that came from North America, and they said, "Oh, I pay, I don't know, 150 soles the kilogram for this type of meat, this like breed of cow that produces North America, but all the source of the food of that cow comes from here, from South America." So eating that kilogram of meat, I'm not vegan, I'm not vegetarian, I love meat, but I prefer, for example, to buy my meat from a local farmer next to my house, because I know that that cow will have less impact than a cow that have been fed with food that was produced in South America, then sent the food for the cow North America, and then send back the meat back here. So the trazabilidad, I don't know how to say that, like the impact of that kilogram of meat in the environment is like million times more than if you consume local in everything. It's like Europe in the 80s, and China also uh, import a lot of mahogany that was produced in the Amazon, and they have very good quality of trees that produce wood for construction and everything. It's like only a source of status to have mahogany in a place that is not like wild there. So, asking Michela's question, what we can do outside the world is being more responsible on our decisions of consumption, consumir.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah. Consumption. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Did you have a question, Michela?
No, you can go ahead, Chris. Sorry, like
Yeah, no, okay. Well, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, very good points. I guess a couple other things maybe I wanted to bring up with you guys before we wrap it up is, yeah, we've already touched on it a little bit, but there is a lot of, so these fires, as you both mentioned, are not just Peru, not just the Amazon. They're the whole really different parts of South America across the whole board. And I think that, as you've alluded to, Juan Diego, is super complicated. And I guess maybe if you guys, I don't know, maybe Clemencia, if you want to take a first crack at it, maybe if you can, try to talk a little bit about the regionality of this, because I do think a lot of people don't really know, because a lot of people post the fires from Brazil as a Peruvian NGO or a Brazilian world, and it's just like, it's so complicated. And I think that although there's no way to summarize it all in 5 minutes, because it's so complicated, there is some differences between the usages of the land and the purposes, what will actually be farmed on there, whether it be cattle, produce, etc. You guys have alluded to it a little bit, but maybe one more crack at kind of summarizing it a bit for our viewers and listeners, because I think it's really interesting to talk about how complicated it is across the region.
What do you mean by regionality of this?
So like Brazil, Bolivia, and different parts of Peru. So like my thoughts, maybe you can expand. I'll get started. Is that generally speaking, as you both alluded to, Brazil and Bolivia, I think a lot of the destruction is more for cattle ranching, whereas in many parts of Peru, it's less for cattle and more for smaller scale farms. And then maybe grazing of different type of wildlife up in the Andes. So maybe, if you guys could expand on that a little bit as well, that would be great.
Let's see. I think, in summary, Brazil has larger scale deforestation, mainly for cattle farming. Peru is now seeing large scale deforestation in agriculture for palm, for soybeans up in the northern jungles. In Madre de Dios, it's a lot of small-scale agriculture that's happening. But even, I think, more so than just looking at what's actually being planted and what's happening in each separate region, I think there's a more profound and global driver to the deforestation and to the causes of fires at the end of the day, which is, and which I think Juan Diego kind of touched on, and you marginally touched on as well, Chris, that it's like we have a global market that wants products that are coming out from the Amazon. And at the end of the day, we have Amazonian communities that are depending on these extractive practices and economies incentivized by a global market that is purchasing and depending on products that are coming out from the Amazon, which is a lot of the same things that are happening in the general southern regions of
Global
the world.
traffic. Yep.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, people need to survive and people need to live here in the Amazon. People depend on the forest, be it directly to consume locally for their families, or be it to plant for exportation or to sell to the best bidder locally, which then will sell to the next bidder foreign for exportation. And so what really needs to happen at the end of the day, I think we need to not only look at, okay, what's being planted, what's the problem? It's like, how can we incentivize practices that don't depend on extractive practices, that don't depend on destruction of the Amazon, to build means of life for Amazonian communities? How can people survive here when we want to pose a question of like, how can we decrease deforestation? And for that, an important component is to protect what we already have. But on the flip side, it's very important to work with the government, or not, if that's not working out, which we all know it's quite difficult, especially in Peru, to do so, to encourage practices that don't depend on deforestation, that encourage local consumption, that depend less on a global economy that is extractive, and that there's a lot of lack of knowledge as to where your food is coming from, and what the path to get the cow to your house was, and building transparency, building traceability of all products is an important and an interesting facet of work. I think in Europe, there's some laws coming out that encourage more traceability and more transparency as to, okay, where have each component of your food been grown, or of whatever product you're buying, be it jewelry or food or any kind of other products that are being built. So there's a lot of efforts on the ground to encourage and build capacity to promote more sustainable practices. And at the end of the day, I think it's working with the local communities that are living and working in the Amazon, that in Peru at least, and this is a number that I've been trying to certify that it's still valid to this year. One of the biggest drivers of deforestation was small-scale agriculture, more so than logging, more so than gold mining. Just small-scale agriculture is one of the biggest drivers. So it's like, to me, that's just very clear that we need to be working with small-scale farmers to ensure that they have the skill set and the knowledge to practice their farming in a way that isn't damaging the environment, and incentivize better practice, which needs to have a market, which needs to have, the income needs to happen for them. So we're just connecting a lot of things here. So there's like a circle that needs to be closed where it's like, okay, if you're going to be planting something or farming in a way that's maybe more time intensive, or it's a bit harder and you need to learn and it might not show fruit for the first few years, what's going to happen? How are you going to survive in that timeline while you're adapting to a more sustainable method of farming? So sorry if that was completely off the question, but it's just something that I was thinking about, which I think was very important to share.
I think I'll just mention this quick, then I'll probably toss it to you with the question, Juan Diego, probably to wrap it up. But I just to follow up, Clemencia, I mean, from my perspective, when I hear that and when I see what I see, and when you look at the history books, there's obviously a historical colonial approach to the tropics. They're a resource. That's how, Western countries view them. They don't view them as a place to care about as much as they do a resource. I mean, now it's changing a little bit slowly, but historically and economically, they're a resource to be extracted. And, another way, you're totally right, like actually checking where things are coming from, making sure it's actually ethically and sustainably sourced, but also like increasing the price so that actually more wealth transfer occurs in these countries, because obviously you don't have to harvest as many cows, as much papaya or whatever, if you're getting more money per kilo. And then the reason a lot of the companies go to these countries is because it's cheaper than doing it in their own country. So there's a lot of potential solutions there, and I think you're totally right, Clem, when you say that a lot of it also does it is a bit of both. It's foreign governments, foreign people, but it's also local governments stepping up and trying to develop programs and incentives. Like you said, I like the concept of incentives a lot. And I think that, but there needs to be programs to support people during this project, like program or period, as you said. So yeah, that's well said. Thank you. I guess I wanted to mention, you can add anything you want to that one, Diego, but I did want to also ask you one question, and maybe we'll kind of make this toward the end now. From your perspective, and I guess because you work, I know because I saw it when we were working together last week, you work a lot with the local communities, people who are, they're not maybe able to travel to other parts of the world. They're a little more localized, so their viewpoint is more local. And I'm curious what your perspective is on how someone who's like, I don't know, 25, say a 25-year-old kid, he's working in this area. He's maybe been to Cusco once in his life, but mostly he's living in the jungle areas. What do you think their perspective is about the loss of the Amazon and what's happening? What's your feeling about what their perspective is?
Well, complex question too, but last week we were working with two members of Palmareal native communities that are Esejas, and also one person from Sonene. So those are communities that are located in the riverbanks of the Madre de Dios River basin. Well, the other one is on the heat in the border with Bolivia. So yeah, these communities are not so connected to the big cities. They need to travel by boat to the places. And for example, something that is happening a lot in Palma Real now is that they start having problems with mining, with gold mining. And one of the persons said, it's like the president of the community already sell all the wood that we can, because the other trees that we have in the land of the community is inside the national reserve. So we need to eat. So that's why most of the members of the community are working gold mining, because it's the resource that we have like here in our place. So yeah, it's pretty complex. And in the previous question, for example, we were talking about the agriculture stuff. And to give some numbers, the proper lands for agriculture in Peru is only 7% of the land. We think, wow, Peru is so big. Why only 7%? Peru is so rich. We have 86 different life zones of the 115 that we have in the world, etc., etc. We're so diverse, but the diversity that we have here makes agriculture so complex, because we have the Andes chain that cuts the country in two. Everything in the Pacific region that is in the west of the Andes, from the north central of the country to the south, is a desert. So the only way to make agriculture there is like investing in a lot of technology. There in the Andes, the terrain is so steep that you have small pieces of lands. You can't make like massive plantations or harvest areas. And then what we have in the country, then the Amazon that is flat, but after one production of the land, you need to invest a lot of in nutrients and in work to have that land in the production rate as it was at the beginning. So one of the main problems in the agriculture in the Amazon is that they are clearing new areas in order to have the nutrients on the ground to produce what the global market needs, in like monocultures of papaya or cassava and the different other monocultures that we have here. And yeah, is complex. And about the local communities, is like most of them, they would love to have more tools to produce money in order not to destroy their resources or to use their resources, but they don't have other um, alternative. All the people that visit Posada Amazonas, that is one lodge that the owner is the native community of Infierno. They saw that and said, wow, we want to have the same, but it's not as simple as that I want a lodge and I will have a lodge and a lot of guests coming to that area. We need to create those opportunities in order to grow a business that produce money using the forest instead of destroying the forest.
Yeah. Well
So
said.
yeah, we can talk hours about this. So,
Yeah.
but
No,
in general, the problem is the opportunities. It's like there are source of money that are easy to get, like only taking the resources instead of building something more on it.
yeah. Well said. I mean, I completely agree. And I guess, yeah, I think that's one of the things that it's really important to explain how complicated this is, because it's very easy to sit in your home somewhere with your mahogany floors and look at the photos and the videos and say, oh, it's so terrible that those people are doing that down there, without actually taking the time to realize that it's happening because they don't have money, because they're desperate, because there isn't other opportunities. And it's very complicated. It's not a black and white situation. It's very regional. It's very, very dependent on your income status, your life status, where you live. It's just super complicated. So yeah, I mean, well, you asked Clemencia how long this would be, and there we are, 50 minutes. So it's typically complicated, but yeah, there you go. We could probably talk another hour easily, but I really appreciate both of you taking the time. And yeah, really, really awesome. It's great to get some more details out there in the public. I hope people enjoyed this. Hope people watch it. And yeah, I'm sure the three of us will have a chance to talk again when we're in together, when I'm back in the jungle in a few weeks. And yeah, thank you so much, guys. Really, really appreciate it. Let's keep in touch, and who knows, maybe we can do a follow-up about this some other day in the future as well.
Thank you so much. I learned quite a bit from both of you, or all three of you, and I'm hoping that my naive questions can help other people who are very unaware, of the true gravity of this situation. And I think you guys really were, said it quite eloquently. So thanks.
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and nice to meet you,
You
Michela.
too.
All right. Well, that was really good. I mean, it was a tough topic, but very good. I think having them on and getting the perspectives, and for me, as I said at the beginning of the interview, it's just nice to be able to give some context, even after 40, 50 minutes of talking. It's still like a really shallow layer of context, but it's something, because they did a really good job of explaining just how complicated this subject is. It's not black and white, and it's not simple. It's very complicated.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, I wanted to continue the conversation. Obviously we did after we were done recording, but, yeah, like you said, yeah, it's tough, because when you have a developing country that does need financial resources, but the only way that they have currently is just depleting the land, that's a really tough topic. And also, I'm glad that they talked about the new law in Peru in terms of how you are purchasing land, and you have to develop if you purchase land right now. And to me, that's it's disheartening to hear that that was put into place, and obviously has caused a lot of impact since its establishment in January.
Yeah, it's a backward system, and it's really interesting how they describe the fact that Clemencia made the point about how country sort of judges its success, which of course is a political thing as much as anything, by its development. And I think that this is a whole other bigger political topic, but it just shows you how the system that we have built that exists, that is dependent on constant growth, is not sustainable. And right here you have a really small but really impactful example of that, when the only way you can own land is to develop it, because that helps show the country that it's growing, and it's not sustainable. It's impossible. So
it is, yeah. And
it's very complicated.
Yeah, like another thing too that we did talk about off air is that like they had mentioned sustainable practices for people purchasing outside of the country. And right now, I think that the whole world is experiencing a global inflation where everyone's just really struggling to make ends meet. So, when we do want to be more sustainable in terms of our consumption, it's really difficult because we're just also trying to get by day to day. And, like, especially when, rent prices are half or 60% of our paycheck, and we're just trying to get food, and inflation of food is so tremendous currently that, really it's only the 1% that's getting by super fine and everyone else is struggling. And so we're at a point where we have to fix what's going on in our own countries in order to help others, I think, too. And that's, that's
totally
another
true.
topic.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's again, conservation in the long run is really a political and societal and economical issue. I think often conservation is viewed in its own bubble as being something where we work to save this one piece of land, and of course that works short term. It works to save that land, to save the species in that one area, but you simply can't have that system apply to the whole world. And the only way the system is going to apply to the whole world is when the system itself changes.
Yep.
So, right now, this is what I've tried to say, in anything I've put on social media or when I talk to anyone is, we need to think of how do we react to what's happening, because we have emotional reaction. We want to help. And there's not one solution. There has to be a short-term solution or short-term assistance, which is, save this land, put out that fire. Yeah. Okay. But there needs to be bigger, longer term thinking. And that's got to come from a complete change in our politics and our economy and how we view the world and how we live in it. And how that works and how all of us decide to do it, it's regional, it's personal. And this isn't the place to give my personal opinions on everything, other than to say, we need change. Exactly how that change is going to look, we're going to see, but it has to happen, because if it doesn't, this is going to continue and just get worse. And I think it was very important to make the point at the beginning of the episode, the interview, that and this is something we talked about, you're right, Michela, during the sort of post-recording chat, is that, Juan Diego said, he's like, people aren't going to care in 2 months or even less than that in a few weeks, because there will be some rain, not enough, not a normal amount, but it's going to rain in the Amazon within a month. I guarantee you there will be rain, and these fires will start to go down because of that. And therefore the graphic images of destruction will start slowing down, but the destruction will still be happening. It just won't have the flashy, terrible photos and videos of fires. So this is not going to change in 2 weeks, even though the media will stop talking about it as much. And I think that's so important for people to realize, that until a bigger change happens, simply having rain start in 2 weeks doesn't really fix the long-term problem at all.
It's a Band-Aid. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the problem right now with our society. I think also is that we have such an influx of information right now, all the catastrophes going on around the world, that, I think a lot of people do care, but then because, we get so much that is at our fingertips that the next big thing is going to happen also in the next 2 weeks. And yeah, you're right. Everyone's going to forget. So how do we, as a society and a community, stay focused on one thing at a time, right? And it's about compartmentalizing, but also, taking care of yourself too, because this stuff is quite bleak. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I have quite a bit of anxiety after having this conversation. And I think it's because, we live in this world as scientists, we understand the grave impacts, whereas not everyone, obviously, but a lot of the general public do not understand, or maybe they choose to ignore it. And I think that's another reason why some people tend to drop it too, is because it is so provoking with anxiety and with its bleakness that they're like, oh, okay, there's no more fires. Thank gosh, everything's fine. It'll be fine. And kind of living this bliss denial where we live this reality every single day. And it's tough. So it's definitely, take care of yourself while you are dealing with this too, but don't forget it. Don't drop it.
And I think, that's a good point too, is that we also live in a society and a culture that is prone toward extremism. And what I mean is that, well, in everything, politics and everything. But I think that people who are attuned to this can be prone to extremism. By that, I mean, one extreme is ignore it completely when it's not in the news. The other extreme is be so overwhelmed by it that you become racked with anxiety or almost give up and feel hopeless. And neither is really productive if you think about it. I mean, because as much as you're totally right, Michela, we both know, because we're biologists, how bad it is. But also both of us have seen how amazing nature is and how resilient it is. And we see examples. We see species that, how the hell did they exist? How did this evolve? How is so amazing. And we see examples of species surviving in such terrible areas. We see examples of forests recovering. I mean, we had the author of I'm sorry, I'm blanking his name right now, but we had the author of How to Love a Forest a few months ago talking about this patch of shitty forest he bought and how it came back to life. And these stories tell you nature is resilient, so we do not need to give up. But the point is, either extreme is not going to help. So we need to be aware of the situation, try to make changes in the short term and the medium term, and push toward longer term changes. So all of us have, I think, a responsibility, if we care, to not give up, but also not be silent, and make sure that we do everything we can in our power while taking care of ourselves, while making sure we can eat. Because if we're not healthy and we're not surviving, we can't do anything. But also just being ignorant and burying your head in the sand, or panicking so you can't do anything and you're crippled, neither one is going to work. We just need to share this knowledge and do whatever we can. So anybody's listening, for me, anything you can do to help, whether that's donating, whether that's raising awareness, whether it's making sure you get out and vote. I mean, I would hope in what I would consider the right way, but whatever you want, I guess. But you know what I mean. But sorry, guys. I just think. And if you don't think there's a right way to vote now, because you don't like either candidate in both Canada and America's elections, okay, then you know what? That's fair, because neither candidate probably is perfect. Definitely not. But that doesn't mean you give up either. Maybe you get involved in politics. Maybe you are someone in a position where you can get involved, do something. Whatever it is, we need to try to do what we can in our own way. And just giving up or ignoring it is not the solution. That would be my only takeaway from the episode. Because we just standing by me. If you stand back and let this happen, you're going to just what are you doing? And if you give up because you're too scared, that's also not going to help. So that's my perspective. Be inspired by how amazing nature is, to have hope that it can survive and it can recover.
Yeah, absolutely. I just don't think we're as resilient. So I think nature will always persist. Us, I'm not too sure about, but I think that
we're surprisingly resilient as well, more than we maybe give ourselves credit for. The fact that we're doing so much for the planet in the way we do is a sad example of how resilient we actually are as a species, in my opinion. So
yeah, you're right. I know I need to be not as pessimistic about it. I think the current election has got me frustrated, to say the least.
Well, I'm sure you're not alone. So
I'm not.
Well, I guess we'll wrap it up there before we go into a political conversation and get ourselves canceled even more. So yeah.
I know. I can't wait to get canceled now.
Yeah. So
You guys brought politics into this.
yeah, it's not the politics stories podcast. So yeah.
Right.
All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks a lot for tuning in, everybody who stuck through this long episode, but important episode. And we'll be back next week, probably with a more normal episode. Thanks a lot for tuning in and taking the time to listen to us, everyone. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Ciao.